Hi, it's Jim. This is a replay of a Cybersecurity Today episode with my friend and colleague Howard Solomon doing the interviewing. It's with a Toronto lawyer who is an exceptionally knowledgeable person in terms of what happens before and after a breach. I think it's one of those things that everybody should know about. I found it very, very informative. I think you will too. So here's Howard Solomon interviewing Imran Ahmad, a partner in Norton Rose Fulbright's cybersecurity practice.
What should management and IT leaders do when their organization is hit by ransomware? To help answer that question today, I'm joined by Imran Ahmad, a partner in the Norton Rose Fulbright law firm and Canadian co-head of the firm's cybersecurity and data privacy practice. I asked him to be on the show because recently he was part of a workshop at a privacy conference on how to respond to a ransomware attack. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Howard. Really happy to be here.
First, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So you had a pretty good intro there. I wear a couple hats at the firm. I started out 20 years ago, primarily as a technology contracting lawyer. And then very shortly after that, discovered cybersecurity and privacy as a practice area. And at the time, there wasn't much going on in that space. Then we had in very short succession some major breaches, and my practice sort of took off from that point onward. So I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time. But fun fact, I'm originally from Montreal. I actually, maybe people don't know this, but I speak French as a first language, multilingual, and a very proud Montreal Canadiens fan.
Okay, let's get straight to the plot. If your firm doesn't have an incident response plan for reacting to any cyber attack, including ransomware, you're in trouble.
It's tough when clients call. So let me give you a bit of an idea how the sausage is made. We will often get a phone call late on a Friday night or end of day Friday, or maybe even after a long weekend. It could be like a Sunday, Monday kind of thing for a long weekend. And the client's going to say, look, we're noticing something is happening in our IT environment. Seems like something is locked up or encrypted. Maybe there was a note that was left behind, but maybe nothing was actually stolen other than a claim that they took the data. We just don't know. And at that point, what they're doing is a few things. Either they have us as their breach coach and they're calling us as a process and protocol thing. Either they have cyber insurance and maybe the insurer said, contact a breach coach, or for some other reason, they may have been put in touch with us through a third party. And our goal there is to really start structuring the response, making sure that we have a game plan. And I tell this to every single client of ours, you're not going to be judged by the fact that you had an incident. It happens a lot. It happens more frequently than people would like to admit. But you're going to be judged on the response. And having that really quick, methodical response on a go-forward basis is really critical.
When you get called for help, how many organizations aren't prepared?
Good question, Howard. I mean, to be honest with you, I think there's always some level of preparation within an organization. I think one term that comes up a lot at these conferences we go to is what is your cyber maturity level? And it could be in terms of responding, in terms of your security safeguards. It could be a variety of things. It depends how we define the question. But essentially, how many of them have no idea what to do next? Most do, to be honest with you. They know what to do. They have been to conferences, they've read about this, or they've attended sessions with their colleagues or talked to peers. So they have an idea. What they don't necessarily have a good grasp on is the sequencing of how we should proceed. For example, you need to communicate with your staff when systems are down. But what do you put in that communication? When do you push it out? How do you push it out? How frequently do you update your staff members? That's the detail sometimes that can be a bit more challenging. And I'll pause after this one comment. I often say it's not a science, more of an art dealing with breaches. No matter how similar you hear about ransomware incidents attacking organizations, they're all very unique. So you have to adjust accordingly.
What are the elements of a good ransomware response plan?
I'll take your question a bit more broadly in terms of what is a good cyber incident response. And I'll answer the question in a reverse way. So I don't know if you know this or your listeners know this, but I teach a course. I've been teaching a course at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law for the last 8 years. And one of the first exercises we do as a group is basically I ask the students to go online and research what, in their view, were some of the worst responses they've seen anywhere around the world. It doesn't really matter if it's Canadian or not. And almost to a student group, they all come up with the same ones. So you dig in and you ask, why are these standing out as being not very good responses to a cybersecurity incident or a ransomware incident in particular? And there's three things that come up over and over again. So number one is seems like they were down for a really long time. Like we get it, people get impacted and you can be down for a few days, but when you're down for a month or more, there's something really significant that may have happened, which gives people the impression they weren't ready for it. That's one. Second one that comes up in terms of poor responses, they seem to not have a handle of the situation. The communication isn't clear, or they change the story over and over again. Like new facts are being discovered that weren't even in the realm of possible before, or they're correcting previous statements. That gives a sense that they don't have a good handle on the situation. The third one that comes up as well is where organizations are being heavily investigated or sued in class actions or congressional hearings or equivalent litigation and so on. And that often just from an optics perspective, not necessarily on the merits, on the optics, maybe giving the impression that the organization did something wrong because there's allegations out there. So those three are the hallmarks of poor response. I would argue the opposite would probably be hallmarks of a good response.
How many ransomware attacks have you been called in on to advise?
A lot. We have, just to give you a sense of numbers and size, we have one of the largest, if not the largest, cybersecurity practice in Canada. And we talk to our US and our European and other colleagues around the world at Norton Rose. Just in Canada, we have managed hundreds of breaches each year. Now, obviously, some are smaller, some are larger, some are more complex and have full teams on it. Others can be managed by a single lawyer. But we do see a significant number. In 2021, we had seen 320 cases. Now, of those, a smaller proportion were ransomware, but they come in waves. What happens is it's really interesting. There was a time when, for example, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, a lot of these ransomware gangs disbanded under their previous names, which were heavily identified with Russia, and they rebranded and reappeared in other names. And we had seen a decrease in the number of ransomware attacks shortly after that period. But we saw an increase, interestingly enough, on business email and wire fraud activity. It comes in waves. It's not like we can say 2024, it's been the year of the ransomware. Certainly there's a large number, but nothing that has really shocked or surprised us in a meaningful way.
Have you been in an incident response, Rue, or is most of the work that you personally do over the phone advising?
We've been for some of the bigger breaches that occur, which are in some cases, we call them existential crises for an organization because of the brand and the reputation or the operational impact. We will be in the room. So the way it works is, let's just take the example of a very complex ransomware incident. So large organization, very complex incident, maybe even multi-jurisdictional. The lawyer, the breach coach, is not just there to give sort of privacy advice. There's different work streams which are established throughout the process, ranging from certainly setting up the investigation so you have proper legal privilege where it can be asserted, that you have work streams on what we call containment and restoration, firstly and foremost, and then obviously the forensic investigation side. Where did they get in from? How did they get in? What did they do when they were in? What did they take potentially from your environment? You're going to have a communication work stream. You may be also advising the board in real time and senior leadership. You may be interfacing with government regulators, but also government ministries as well, depending on what sector you're in. So there's a lot of different work streams, Howard, that operate there. And we are typically embedded in the war room at that point, either physically, virtually, or in a hybrid mode.
What's the temperature like?
It can get heated. I say this to our clients all the time. You're going to be faced with bad and worse options, not good and bad. And nobody wants to be making a decision with partial information, which is often what they're called upon to do. And so even, for example, making a ransom payment, which we generally discourage if you can avoid it as an organization, there may be situations you have to make a payment. And look, we all know these are criminals in large cases, right? By and large, I'm giving you a number, it's not backed by any statistic, but over 90%, I'm guessing, are criminal groups, 10% being state-sponsored or hacktivists or others. And nobody wants to pay a criminal. Nobody does. And so sometimes when you're forced to make those kind of decisions and you're stress testing it and you have divergence of views, it can get pretty heated. The other area where we get a lot of, I'll call it constructive back and forth, although there can be a bit of a healthy tension there, is with communications. Most organizations and their comms folks are going to want to be as transparent as they can, but there's some things we know and some things we don't know. And do we want to go and say things which will be potentially inaccurate or that are speculation? No. But we also don't want to mislead anyone. We don't want to overstate an incident. We don't want to minimize an incident. We want to be as accurate and factually correct as we can be, even if the information is not very satisfying. We don't have all the answers at minute one. So that's another area where how much do we disclose? When do we disclose comes up.
And it's not like we've been hit We just have to recover, and it's an IT problem. A cyber attack is usually something that's kinetic. It can be an ongoing crisis where the press calls, hey, that's me. The attacker wants to communicate. You discover the attacker is monitoring your email and is responding in real time to your defenses.
So it's interesting you use the word kinetic. I say this to our clients as well. Contrary to other types of risks, like flooding or fires, those are static risks, meaning they've been well modeled by various actuarial scientists. You know exactly how to respond to them by and large. Cyber is different. It's move, counter move. You remember this, Howard, I'm sure. A few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, we didn't hear about dual extortion, stealing the data and then locking it up. You typically just heard about data being encrypted. And if you were a company that had good, viable backups, you were back up and running relatively quickly. That was the typical approach. You didn't have to engage on privacy or regulatory issues or anything of that nature. That's now changed. So it is more complex. And as we move to a playbook to respond to dual extortion, we're now starting to see triple extortion, additional techniques to put pressure on organizations. Yeah, it's changing quite a bit. And that's the challenge of cyber, is giving, maybe I'll just share this for any of your audience members who are lawyers who are not in cyber. It is an adrenaline practice. It is very intense. It is all the time. Clients are not going to wait for their breach coach to go and write a memo for over 2 weeks and think about it on the decision to pay a ransom or not. They want an answer quickly. They pull us into a board meeting and they want legal justification for one option or the other. And this is the hardest part. They want a recommendation from counsel. What are you telling me to do, Imran? What have you seen in this space? That's the bigger challenge I find. It's an intense practice. It's very gratifying, to be honest with you, when we do get through the other side of the tunnel. But while you're going through it, it can be quite intense.
When the alarm is raised at the company, at the organization, is the external lawyer the first or the second person who should be called?
Look, I don't want to sound self-serving being a lawyer speaker on your podcast here saying you should call a lawyer. But look, you should call your lawyer and or your insurer very quickly right after you discover it. I'll tell you why. On the lawyer side, there's this whole concept of privilege, which is a safe space between the lawyer giving advice and the client sharing some basic information to inform that decision. Now, although I'm pretty technical and I have a good technology background, I'm not a forensic investigator, certainly not a comms expert. I'm not a ransom negotiator. And so sometimes, depending on the incident, you got to bring in other vendors or other partners who are going to be able to help me advise the client. Hey, don't pay, notify now, notify later, talk to the regulator, send out these communications or not. So there's all these things that come into play. And that is why you want to get that right from the get-go, because it'll set the tempo as to what the next steps are going to be, all those work streams that I talked about earlier. The insurance piece, and I'm not an insurance expert, but I'm a big fan of cyber insurance. A lot of the insurers will typically provide you sort of a package. Here's your breach counsel. Here's your forensic firm. We vetted them for expertise. You get the benefit of discounted rates in some cases for those vendors. And that helps immediately get your response team up and running in case you didn't have it already.
A controversial question is, can all documents and communications during the crisis be privileged? That is, hidden from the other side if there's a lawsuit?
It's a great question. It comes up a lot by clients. Let me just get rid of some myths that exist there. First of all, copying a lawyer on something doesn't make it privileged. And privilege is not absolute. But the more important piece is privilege typically does not apply or extend to facts. You can't hide a breach. You can't hide the fact number of servers were impacted by saying it's privilege. Or it's not that kind of a tool. It is essentially related to the advice the lawyer is giving to their client. So it's really the advice portion of it that is privileged. So no, not all documents are privileged necessarily. Facts are not privileged necessarily. And also some clients may intentionally, for good reasons, waive privilege. What that means is you have that privilege relation between the lawyer and the client, but for whatever reason, you say, you know what, I want to share this with a third party. By sharing it with a third party, you may be at that point waiving privilege intentionally or unintentionally. And that's important because I've heard a lot of conversation. There's some case law that's been coming out of the United States and elsewhere that says a lawyer asserted privilege was waived or privilege was not applicable and therefore we're removing it. You have to be very careful how privilege is structured and for what purpose. It should not be used as something to hide facts.
But what are the biggest mistakes that incident response team members make?
I think, well, a few, and I'll maybe flag maybe 2 or 3 that may be helpful to your viewers. One would be hackers are really good, especially in ransomware extortion situations, to put pressure on people. If you don't respond to me in X number of minutes or hours, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. Client may get nervous. They may not have been able to reach their breach coach or haven't even thought about contacting their breach coach. They may not know or have any insurance in place, and they feel like they're in it alone. And at that point, they start communicating with a threat actor who, even though they're criminals, are experts in putting pressure and extorting money. And so you're then in this back and forth with the hacker, which may not be particularly helpful, may actually be even a problem in case you do bring experts in later on, who then have to go in and say, we don't have this, or we do have that, and here's how we're going to position. The whole strategy can potentially fall apart. So engaging with a threat actor too quickly and directly is strongly discouraged. What you want to do is get a qualified ransom negotiator and counsel involved in that piece. The second one is if clients do have insurance in place, or even if they don't, but don't call the breach coach and go ahead right away and engage a forensic firm to help them get back up and running. Sometimes at that point, obviously, you won't be able to apply privilege, but certainly that's going to be a problem in the event of a litigation or investigation from a regulator. That can be challenging in terms of what can occur. And then I think the third one is the communication piece, which I alluded to earlier. So everybody wants to be doing things right, and they want to do right by their staff. They want to do right by their business partners. But a lot of people will announce things that are not factually backed. And so you go out there, you go, we've been attacked, cyber attacked. It's a ransomware incident. Data was taken. Now, you ask the question, why did you say data was taken? Oh, it was in the ransom note. We haven't validated that fact yet. We need to validate it before you make a statement, because if it's not true that they took the data, it happens. Sometimes hackers bluff, or our investigation finds no data was indeed taken, or both. Try to walk that back and explain to people why that was something we stated and now we don't believe it to be true can be very challenging and difficult.
Why, when they make public statements, are organizations afraid to use the R word? They're afraid to say, we've been hit by ransomware. They'll say, we've suffered a cyber attack.
I don't think anybody is against the use of the word ransomware when it's confirmed. I think that's a fact. I think early on in the system, so just for the audience benefit, not everything qualifies as a ransomware incident. You could have a situation where no data is locked up. There's no malware, but data may have been taken and there's an extortion. That's not a ransomware attack. That's an extortion attempt. But you could have a situation where you saw abnormal activity and no encryption has occurred, no data was taken, but you see some lateral movement in the environment. That's not a ransomware incident, even if it's a precursor to and may have led to potentially down the road had it not been checked, a ransomware incident. That's a cybersecurity incident because we ourselves took systems offline proactively in some cases. So it really depends where we're at in the life cycle of the response, and details do matter, because if you say ransomware, people will ask you the next question. Okay, it's ransomware, so data is encrypted, data was taken. What data was taken? We're not there yet. We haven't even gone to that determination yet. So if you ask the same question, let's say a week later or 2 weeks later, potentially you'll get a slightly different answer when we do have validation on whether it was or wasn't a ransomware attack.
What's the definition of a successful outcome to a ransomware attack?
I'll give you two answers to this. I'll give you the legal one from my perspective, and I'll give you just a business one, which is more important, I think. Legally, there's a case that came out a few years ago. I believe it was the Home Depot case and the Casino Rama cases, where justices in Ontario said, look, the response was as good as it could be. So you're not judged, like I said, on the fact you had an incident, you judge on the response itself. Did you notify individuals appropriately? Did you notify the privacy commissioners? Did you get systems up and running? Did you offer credit monitoring where it was appropriate? And so on and so forth. So there are some parameters of what is a successful, from a legal perspective, response. A regulator may ask you questions, and that's totally fine. Is a regulator going to investigate you? That's a different story. You may have somebody, and it's now getting more and more difficult and rare, just who's going to start a class action case against an organization that reports an incident. There are now a lot more challenges. You have to show there's a causality between your incident and the harm the person is suffering. You have to show a compensable harm. It can't just be inconvenience. So there's a variety of things that have to be shown. So I think lack of litigation, a lack of regulatory investigation, a good response, generally speaking, these are the hallmarks of a good response. The business one, and this is the conversation I have with clients all the time, there's 4 risks when we talk about cyber risk. Operational disruption, you can't operate, financial that goes along with it, obviously legal and regulatory, but the 4th one is the reputational goodwill harm. It is the hardest one to calculate. there's no metrics really that you can quantify saying I lost X trust from my employees. You may get a sense of it, but you can't quantify in dollars and cents necessarily. That is what is the success parameter for me, is when a client says, look, we went through this very difficult time, but when we came on the other side of it, we did not lose clients. We used this as an opportunity to reinforce that relationship by investing in, strengthening our cybersecurity measures and becoming best in class and so on.
There's a lot of talk about choking off the supply of what drives ransomware attacks, which is money. Last October, 50 countries, including the US and Canada, pledged their national governments won't give in to extortion demands. Can governments forbid the private sector from paying ransomware gangs?
Sure, they can. They would have to pass legislation. And look, just so you know, there are checks and balances already in terms of what you can or cannot do. Even if an organization, and we discourage payment when you can avoid it, but we understand sometimes you have no choice because it's an existential attack or an extinction event type incident. But even before you make a payment, you have to do what we call a sanction check. It's not automatic that you can pay anyone in any amount that you like. The sanction check is typically you get a ransom negotiator who will look in various databases. For example, in the US, you have the Office of Foreign Asset Control. In Canada, you have equivalents, and globally as well. And you check to see if, based on the indicators of compromise we're looking at, is this entity or this individual on a sanctioned list? If they are, it's a no-go. You can't proceed anymore as a general proposition. You may have to get exemptions, but that's extremely rare for somebody to get one or even ask for one, because that takes time. So that's not going to typically happen. Certainly, can governments make those conditions more strict? Certainly. I think when you're operating in a critical infrastructure environment, you have even more considerations, because any critical infrastructure which can have a cascading effect on society. So think of the 10 categories of public safety critical infrastructures in Canada, or the Department of Homeland Security, which has their own list. Yeah, you're going to have a lot more hesitation, and you're going to have a lot more government involvement and say, potentially, in terms of paying or not paying a ransom for sure. You got to realize Canada is the backbone of our economy is based on small and medium-sized businesses. And in some cases, they have no choice. And I'm saying some cases, which we can get into if you like, they have no choice but to make a payment. If you take that away from them and you put a blanket prohibition with no ability to look at it from a case-by-case perspective, you're going to potentially be shortchanging this small and medium-sized business, ranging from the small mom and pop to the companies that are mid-market and scale-ups. And that is something we should be just mindful of in making those kind of determinations from a policy standpoint.
Finally, why aren't organizations prepared for cyber attacks? It's 2024. What aren't they doing right?
It's a mixed bag. I think they are. There are some organizations that are really ahead of the curve. Others that are struggling a little bit. Look, it's a tough economy right now too, right? Interest rates are going up. The economy is slowing in many respects in Canada and around the world. Growth isn't what it used to be. Budgets are tight. And as much as I think security should be number one priority as a security lawyer, a lot of people also have competing budget requirements on marketing and advertising to grow the business, payroll, and a variety of other things. So it's often making very difficult decisions to meet those cybersecurity needs, along with still managing and running a business. So that's one. Secondly, I think even the ones that are investing in the area will still get attacked because hackers are getting smarter and better. One thing we haven't talked about yet, Howard, is the role of AI. It's not theoretical anymore. I see it on cases actively where AI is being leveraged on wire frauds, and we're seeing it now more and more on malware and zero-day vulnerability attacks that are trying to be leveraged by these hackers. You're going to see sophisticated hackers using tools that you and I would think are very positive tools for bad things, like AI, to be able to attack organizations. So the number of attacks are going to go up. The complexity is going to go up. And we have to be understanding, it's not the fact they get attacked. They are prepared. A lot of them are. But it's how they respond to it that's going to be the success story here, hopefully, that we can tell on your show next time.
Okay. This has been really great advice, Imran. Thanks so much for being with us this week.
Thanks for having me, Howard. Really enjoyed it.
Links to details about news mentioned in this podcast episode are in the text version at technewsday.com. Follow Cybersecurity Today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or add us to your flash briefing on your smart speaker. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. I'm Howard Solomon.